If I told you that World War III wouldn't begin with a nuclear test or a momentous declaration from the White House, but with something so small, so distant, and so imaginary as still under control, would you believe me? Right now, the world is in a state of heightened tension. Many conflict zones are sound. Links are being tested. Military forces are moving in silence. And most of us are going about our daily lives, thinking it's just another regional crisis like the ones we've had before. But history reveals a rather unpleasant truth. Global wars don't begin when people are prepared for them. We begin when leaders miscalculate, when alliance commitments are automatically triggered, and when no one wants to be the first to back down. So today, we're going to analyze a practical question, not sensational, not fear-mongering, based on strategy and facts. How can a regional conflict escalate into a larger war? And what conditions could actually trigger a global war? Let's look at the bigger picture and explore what's really happening behind the daily news headlines. If I'm being completely honest, I don't believe World War III would begin with some dramatic presidential speech or a headline that says, "Global war has started." That's not how history works. When you look back at World War I, it began with a single assassination that triggered alliance obligations. World War II didn't explode overnight either. It escalated step by step while much of the world hoped it would stop. And if a third world war were ever to happen, I think it would start the same way, not with a declaration, but with a regional conflict spiraling beyond anyone's control. Right now, the world feels like dry timber scattered across multiple regions. The Middle East remains volatile. Eastern Europe is already locked in grinding warfare. Tensions simmer in the Taiwan Strait, and global shipping lanes like the Red Sea are under constant pressure. Each flashpoint may look separate on a map, but geopolitically they are interconnected. A strike in one region shifts military resources in another. A miscalculation in one theater sends shockwaves through alliance systems elsewhere. What worries me most isn't that major powers wake up wanting a global war, it's that they underestimate how quickly escalation can happen. Imagine a scenario where a regional clash intensifies, a strike hits a base hosting US forces. Washington responds decisively to reassert deterrence credibility. Allies feel compelled to show solidarity, and rival powers step in with limited support that gradually expands. Within days, what started as a contained confrontation becomes a test of alliance commitments and national resolve. History shows that miscalculation, not grand design, often drives escalation. Leaders assume the other side will back down. They assume deterrence will hold. But when domestic politics, national pride, and credibility are on the line, backing down becomes politically costly. From an American perspective, alliance structures are both our greatest strength and a potential escalation mechanism. Mutual defense commitments exist to prevent war through deterrence. Yet if a member state is attacked, collective response becomes almost automatic. That's stabilizing in peacetime but combustible during crisis. Add modern realities, cyber warfare capable of disabling infrastructure, instantaneous media cycles amplifying outrage, AI-assisted military systems accelerating decision-making, and the time available for calm diplomacy shrinks dramatically. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, leaders had days to think through consequences. Today, responses could unfold in minutes. I don't think global war is inevitable. Nuclear deterrence, economic interdependence, and the sheer destructive cost of modern conflict remain powerful restraints. But the first stage of any world war would likely look ambiguous at first, markets rattling, alliances mobilizing, rhetoric hardening, limited strikes expanding, by the time the word world war enters public discourse. The chain reaction may already be in motion. That's why the most dangerous phase isn't the explosion, it's the slow burn. When decision makers convince themselves the situation is still manageable, history suggests that's exactly when it stops being manageable at all. If I'm looking at the world honestly right now, I don't see a single spark that screams world war. I see multiple pressure points that, together, create something far more concerning. It's not one crisis, it's the accumulation of crises. The Middle East remains volatile, with long-standing rivalries layered over newer confrontations. Eastern Europe is still dealing with a grinding war that has reshaped NATO's posture and forced the United States to recommit to European security in ways we haven't seen in decades. In East Asia, tensions in the Taiwan Strait continue to test the balance between deterrence and provocation. With military drills, airspace incursions, and strategic ambiguity forming a constant background hum of instability. Then you add the Red Sea and major shipping lanes, where disruptions remind us how fragile global trade really is. None of these flashpoints automatically equals World War III, but taken together, they form a web of interconnected risks that didn't exist in quite the same way even 20 years ago. What stands out to me is how interconnected everything has become. In 1914, alliances dragged countries into war through formal treaties. Today, the system is more complex. We have formal alliances, economic interdependence, cyber vulnerabilities, global supply chains, and real-time information warfare all layered on top of one another. A disruption in one region doesn't stay contained, it ripples outward. If energy supplies are threatened in the Middle East, markets react instantly in New York. If conflict intensifies in Eastern Europe, defense postures shift in the Pacific. If tensions spike in Asia, global manufacturing feels it within weeks. The speed of reaction is unprecedented. That speed can stabilize through deterrence, or destabilize through panic. From an American perspective, we tend to evaluate global instability through the lens of commitments and credibility. The United States maintains security relationships across multiple continents. That's both a stabilizing force and a structural risk. Deterrence works when adversaries believe escalation would be too costly. But deterrence requires visible readiness, troop deployments, naval patrols, joint exercises, and sometimes those signals, meant to prevent conflict, are interpreted by the other side as preparation for it. That's where miscalculation enters, not because leaders want a world war, but because they interpret signals differently, under pressure, in compressed timelines. Another factor that feels uniquely modern is the role of domestic politics. Every major power today operates under intense internal scrutiny. Leaders are balancing economic strain, public opinion, political polarization, and national identity narratives. When a crisis erupts, it's not just a strategic decision, it's a domestic political test. No leader wants to appear weak. No government wants to look like it abandoned an ally. That dynamic shrinks the space for compromise. In previous eras, diplomacy often unfolded behind closed doors. Slowly, today, public narratives form instantly on social media, and governments react not just to events, but to perception. Perception can escalate situations just as quickly as actual military moves. Then there's technology. Modern warfare isn't confined to tanks crossing borders. Cyber operations can disrupt power grids, financial systems, communications networks. Satellite systems can be targeted. AI-assisted defense systems compress decision-making timeframes dramatically. In past crises, leaders sometimes had hours or days to verify information before responding. Today, the pressure to respond is immediate. That immediacy increases the chance of error. And when you're dealing with nuclear-armed states, even a small error carries enormous consequences. Nuclear deterrence still functions as a powerful restraint, arguably the strongest one preventing global war. But deterrence assumes rational calculation under stress. History shows that stress can distort judgment. What also concerns me is the psychological normalization of tension. We've been living with persistent geopolitical stress for so long that it starts to feel routine. Sanctions, proxy conflicts, military exercises, they're no longer shocking headlines. But normalization doesn't mean safety. Sometimes prolonged tension creates complacency. Leaders begin to assume escalation won't happen because it hasn't happened yet. Markets assume resilience because they've weathered prior shocks. Populations tune out warnings because previous crises didn't spiral. Yet systems under constant strain can fail suddenly, not gradually. At the same time, I don't think global war is inevitable. Economic interdependence still acts as a stabilizer. The cost of total war between major powers would be catastrophic in ways that are obvious to policymakers. International institutions, however imperfect, still provide communication channels. Back-channel diplomacy continues even when rhetoric sounds hostile. Military-to-military communication lines exist specifically to prevent accidental escalation. These mechanisms matter. They've likely prevented crises from spiraling more than the public realizes. So when I look at today's world, I don't see an imminent world war. I see a high-risk environment shaped by multiple simultaneous flashpoints. Rapid information flows, domestic political pressure, technological acceleration, and deeply entrenched alliance structures. The danger isn't a single bold act of aggression designed to ignite a global conflict. The danger is convergence, 2 or 3 crises overlapping at the wrong time. Decision-makers operating with incomplete information. Alliances activating automatically, and pride preventing de-escalation. World wars historically haven't started because leaders sought planetary destruction. They started because systems were rigid, tensions were layered, and no one wanted to be the first to blink. From where I stand, the lesson isn't panic, it's awareness. Recognizing how interconnected these flashpoints are might actually reduce risk, because it reinforces the importance of restraint and communication. The world today is more complex, more armed, and more technologically advanced than ever, but it's also more economically intertwined and more aware of the stakes. Whether that awareness ultimately prevents catastrophe depends on whether leaders can manage crises without letting multiple pressure points merge into a single, uncontrollable chain reaction. That, to me, is the real story of our moment, not a world on the brink of inevitable war, but a world balancing carefully on overlapping fault lines, hoping that deterrence, diplomacy, and caution hold longer than fear, pride, or miscalculation. Imagine a scenario that isn't too far from reality. An attack on US forces in the Middle East occurs amidst pre-existing tensions. Washington, under pressure to protect its prestige and deterrence, responds with more powerful airstrikes than anticipated. US allies in the region, already concerned about their security, decide to expand their military campaign to take advantage of the strategic moment. Meanwhile, another power announces technical assistance or increased defense cooperation with the attacked party, arguing that they are merely balancing influence. In just a few days, what seemed like a bilateral confrontation could transform into a test of strength between larger power blocks. What worries me isn't the intention to start a world war, but the almost automatic escalation when national honor, alliance commitments, and internal political pressure all come together. Each step may be justified as necessary or defensive, but collectively they form a chain reaction. History shows that major wars rarely begin because leaders genuinely desire a global catastrophe. They usually erupt due to miscalculations. One side believes its response will be strong enough to deter but not so strong as to trigger a larger retaliation. The other side interprets that action as an unacceptable escalation and is compelled to respond proportionally, or even more. In today's world, the speed of information and public pressure accelerate this process. Military decisions are no longer considered over weeks as they once were, they happen in hours, even minutes. This leaves little room for diplomacy. Leaders must balance saving face with domestic voters with avoiding a larger international crisis. From my perspective, the real danger lies in each side believing they are sending a controlled deterrence signal, while the other sees a real threat. When trust is low and communication channels are limited, small misunderstandings can become major turning points. And that is how a regional conflict, which could otherwise be contained, risks spiraling out of control in just a few short days. From my perspective, it's simply a regional conflict that escalated beyond initial predictions. What seemed like a limited event and attack, a stronger than expected retaliation, a military move intended to send a deterrent signal, has disrupted a complex network of pre-existing alliances and security commitments. And when an alliance system is activated, things no longer depend solely on the will of two nations. From an American's point of view, I think the most dangerous thing isn't the ambition to conquer the world, but the almost automatic response mechanism of these security commitments. If an ally is attacked, domestic political pressure forces Washington to act to protect its prestige and deterrence capabilities. But that action, while considered necessary and reasonable on one side, may be seen as a serious escalation on the other. Every step has its own reason. Every decision is justified as defensive. But when added together, they create a chain reaction. No one is declaring that the world has entered a new era of war, but the reality is that the old order has begun to crumble. What strikes me most is the speed of the times. Crises no longer unfold over months for diplomats to quietly handle, but can escalate in days. Financial markets reel, military forces are deployed, tough statements are issued, and domestic public opinion demands a strong response. When no one wants to back down for fear of being seen as weak, de-escalation becomes increasingly difficult. And then, before we know it, the world has turned a new page, not because of a single decision, but because of a series of small, consecutive decisions, each seemingly reasonable at the time. In my opinion, that's the most worrying thing. A global war, if it happens, won't come as a sudden storm, but as a silent current sweeping everything away, while most of us still believe the situation is under control.